Commander Thekvar stood on the bridge of the luminous dawn, his crystalline body catching the light from the ship's screens. His forearms moved across the control panels with practiced ease. The tall alien had served the Galactic Council for 30 years, and this was supposed to be an easy assignment. He was going to meet humans for the first time. The data pad in his lower left hand showed the basic facts about Earth's people. Thekvar's multiple eyes scanned the information again, and he couldn't help but feel amused. These creatures were so small. The average human male was only 6 feet tall, barely reaching his chest. They had no natural armor, no claws, no enhanced strength. Their skin looked thin and soft, like it would tear at the slightest touch. "Commander," his aide spoke from behind him. "The human ship is approaching our docking bay." Thekvar nodded his massive head. His people, the Zilani, were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. Standing 8 feet tall with bodies made of living crystal and stone, they had never lost a war. Their natural armor could stop most weapons, and their strength was legendary. Looking at the human data, Thekvar wondered how such weak beings had even survived long enough to reach space. The human ship was small and simple. Thekvar watched it dock through the viewing port. It looked like something his people might have built 1,000 years ago. No energy shields, no advanced materials, just metal plates welded together. He shook his head. These humans clearly had a long way to go before they could join the real powers of the galaxy. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. 3 humans stepped onto his ship, and Thekvar got his first look at Earth's people in person. They were even smaller than he had expected. The first human, who introduced himself as Jinho, was the diplomatic attaché. He was thin and wore simple clothes that looked more suited for a library than a spaceship. His movements were careful and slow, as if he was afraid of breaking something. The second human was Minji, the cultural liaison. She was even smaller than Jinho, with delicate features and a soft voice. When she shook Thekvar's hand, her grip felt like a child's. Her eyes were wide as she looked around the ship, clearly overwhelmed by the advanced technology surrounding her. The third human surprised Thekvar the most. Hyak was supposed to be their military observer, but he looked completely ordinary. No scars, no visible weapons, no sign of the hardened warrior Thekvar had expected. He was average height for a human, with a quiet manner that suggested he would rather be anywhere else. "Welcome aboard the luminous dawn," Thekvar said, his voice rumbling through the translators. "I am Commander Thekvar of the Zilani Republic." The humans all bowed slightly, which Thekvar found amusing. In Zilani culture, only the weak bowed to the strong. These humans clearly understood their place in the galaxy's order. Over the next few hours, Thekvar observed the human delegation as they toured the ship. They tired quickly, needing to stop and rest every hour. Their breathing became heavy after climbing just a few flights of stairs. When they reached the ship's weapons deck, Jinho actually looked sick at the sight of the massive plasma cannons. "These weapons could destroy an entire city," Jinho said, his voice shaking slightly. "Just one city?" Thekvar replied. "These are our smallest guns. Our main weapons can crack a planet's crust." He watched Minji turn pale at this information. She mumbled something about hoping they would never need to use such weapons. Thekvar found this naive. In a galaxy full of hostile species, superior firepower was the only thing that kept civilizations alive. During their meal together, Thekvar learned more about human society. They spoke of democracy, of making decisions by talking and voting rather than following the strongest leader. They talked about art, music, and literature. They seemed more concerned with creating beautiful things than building powerful weapons. "What happens when someone attacks your world?" Thekvar asked. "We defend ourselves," Hyak said quietly. It was the first time the military observer had spoken much during the tour. "With what?" Thekvar gestured at Hyak's simple uniform. "You carry no weapons. Your people seem to prefer books to battles." Hyak just smiled slightly. "We manage." This answer frustrated Thekvar. How could any species manage without proper military strength? He made a note in his report that humans seemed dangerously unprepared for the realities of galactic warfare. As the day continued, Thekvar's opinion of humans only grew worse. They jumped at loud noises. They seemed confused by the ship's artificial gravity systems. Minji actually got lost trying to find the bathroom and had to ask for help. These people wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real battle. That evening, Thekvar sat in his quarters writing his preliminary report. He recommended that the Galactic Council consider humans for economic partnership only. They might be useful for trade or cultural exchange, but they clearly had nothing to offer militarily. Their technology was primitive, their people were physically weak, and they seemed to have no understanding of what it took to survive in a dangerous galaxy. The communication alert interrupted his writing. The screen showed the emergency symbol of the Galactic Council. Thekvar accepted the call and the image of High Admiral Zorinth appeared. "Commander Thekvar," the Admiral's voice was urgent, "we have a situation in the Outer Rim territories. The Vorthak Empire has launched a surprise attack on 3 systems. They've already overwhelmed the local defense forces." Thekvar felt his crystalline body tense. The Vorthak were one of the most dangerous enemies the galaxy had ever known. Their soldiers were genetically enhanced monsters, standing 10 feet tall with built-in weapons and the ability to heal from almost any wound. "All council members are being called to contribute forces," the Admiral continued. "How soon can you mobilize your fleet?" "Within 6 hours," Thekvar replied automatically. Then he remembered his passengers. "Admiral, I have human delegates aboard my ship. Should I return them to Earth first?" The Admiral's expression was grim. "No time. If they want to see what real galactic warfare looks like, they're about to get their chance. All ships proceed immediately to staging area Chronos 7. The screen went dark, leaving Thekvar alone with his thoughts. He looked at his unfinished report about human weakness and laughed bitterly. Soon these naive people would see what happened when real warriors went to battle. Maybe witnessing the power of the Zalani military would teach them some respect for strength. He stood and walked to the viewing port, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vorthak war machine was grinding through peaceful worlds, destroying everything in its path. It would take the combined might of the galaxy's greatest warrior races to stop them. As for the humans, Thekvar decided he would keep them safe in the rear areas where they couldn't get hurt. It was the least he could do for such a helpless species. The asteroid base Chronos 7 was a sight to see. Hundreds of warships from across the galaxy gathered in the massive docking bays. Thekvar watched from his ship's bridge as the greatest military forces in known space prepared for war. The Brutarian dreadnoughts were the size of small moons, their hulls bristling with weapons. The insectoid Katrani ships moved in perfect formation, controlled by their hive mind. The energy-based Photari didn't need ships. At all. They traveled as pure light between specially designed containment fields, and then there were the, humans. Thekvar stared at the single human vessel docked near his ship. It was tiny compared to the Brutarian dreadnoughts, maybe the size of a Zalani escort craft. Its hull was plain gray metal with no decoration. No impressive weapons were visible on its surface. It looked like a cargo hauler that had gotten lost and wandered into a war zone. "Commander," his aide reported, "the human military contingent is requesting permission to board and coordinate with our forces." Thekvar sighed. He had hoped to keep the humans safely aboard their own ship during the coming battle. "Very well. Send them to Docking Bay 7. 20 minutes later, Thekvar met the human military delegation. He expected to see a few frightened diplomats in fancy uniforms. Instead, he found himself looking at soldiers who seemed remarkably calm for people about to face the Vorthak Empire. Captain Dongjun was the human marine commander. He was average height for a human with gray hair and quiet eyes. His uniform was simple and practical, with no medals or decorations. When he spoke, his voice was steady and professional. "Commander Thekvar, thank you for meeting with us. We're here to coordinate our forces for the upcoming operation." Thekvar looked at the captain's equipment with growing confusion. The human soldiers carried what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons. Their armor was simple ballistic protection, nothing like the energy shields used by advanced species. They looked like they were prepared for a ground war from centuries ago, not modern space combat. "Captain," Thekvar said carefully, "perhaps you misunderstood the situation. We're facing the Vorthak Empire. These are not ordinary enemies. Each Vorthak soldier is 10 feet tall, genetically enhanced and equipped with integrated weapon systems. They can regenerate from wounds that would kill most beings." "We understand the threat, Commander," Captain Dongjun replied calmly. Behind the captain stood his team. Sergeant Yuna looked impossibly young, like she should be in school instead of preparing for war. She carried herself with confidence, but Thekvar couldn't imagine how someone so small could face a Vorthak super soldier. The combat medic, Kyung-ho, looked like he belonged in a hospital, not on a battlefield. His equipment seemed designed for treating ordinary injuries, not the massive trauma that Vorthak weapons inflicted. Suyong, the communications specialist, was constantly checking her equipment with nervous energy. She seemed overwhelmed by the massive alien technology surrounding her. Captain, Tekvar tried again. I strongly recommend that your people remain in support roles for this operation. Communications perhaps, or medical assistance for the rear areas. The front lines will be no place for... He paused, trying to find a diplomatic way to say such weak beings. For humans. Captain Dongjun finished. His expression didn't change, but something in his voice suggested he had heard this before. Commander, we appreciate your concern, but my people prefer to pull their own weight. Tekvar interpreted this as naive bravado. These humans had no idea what they were walking into. He decided to show them exactly what they would be facing. Come with me, he said. Let me show you what real military power looks like. He led the human delegation through the asteroid base. In the Brutarian section, warriors the size of buildings practiced combat maneuvers. Each Brutarian stood 12 feet tall with natural armor plating that could stop tank rounds. Their arms were as thick as tree trunks, capable of crushing steel with bare hands. The Brutarian commander, General Thakmar, demonstrated a training exercise. He picked up a piece of metal debris weighing several tons and hurled it across the bay like it was a small rock. The impact crater in the far wall was 3 feet deep. Impressive, Captain Dongjun said, but he didn't seem intimidated. In the Fotari section, beings of pure energy phased in and out of solid matter. They could become invisible, pass through walls, and strike without warning. Their energy weapons could cut through any known material. The Katrani demonstrated their hive mind coordination. 1,000 insect warriors moved as one, reacting to threats before they even appeared. Their unity was perfect, their response time instantaneous. Each of these species, Tekvar explained, has capabilities far beyond normal biological limits. The Brutarians are nearly indestructible. The Futari can attack from any direction. The Katrani never make tactical mistakes. And the Zilani? Sergeant Yuna asked. Tekvar smiled, showing his crystal teeth. He walked to a training target and struck it with one fist. The reinforced metal crumpled like paper. We are the perfect warriors. Strong, fast, and our crystal bodies can absorb incredible damage. The humans watched this demonstration with interest but not fear. Tekvar found their calm reaction puzzling. Didn't they understand how outclassed they were? The intelligence briefing made things even clearer. The Vorthak forces consisted of 10,000 super soldiers, each one a perfect killing machine. They had overwhelmed 3 planetary defense systems in just 1 week. The defenders had included species that the humans had never even heard of, warriors with natural advantages that made them legendary. The Vorthak strategy is simple, the intelligence officer explained. They use overwhelming individual superiority to break enemy lines, then spread out to destroy everything in their path. No force has ever successfully stopped a Vorthak advance once it begins. After the briefing, the alien commanders began planning their assault. The Brutarians would form the main attack force, using their massive strength to punch through Vorthak defenses. The Fotari would provide support strikes from unexpected angles. The Katrani would coordinate everything with their perfect hive-mind communication. The Zilani would serve as the heavy assault troops, their crystal bodies able to absorb Vorthak weapons fire while delivering devastating counterattacks. And the humans? General Thakmar asked, his voice barely hiding his amusement. There was an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Tekvar spoke up. The humans will provide support functions, communications, medical assistance, supply coordination. Captain Dongjun stood up slowly. With respect, Commander, that's not what we came here to do. Captain, Tekvar said gently, your people are brave, but courage alone won't stop a Vorthak super soldier. You lack the physical capabilities necessary for this kind of warfare. We'll see, was all Captain Dongjun said. As the meeting broke up, Tekvar pulled the human captain aside. Captain, I've seen what the Vorthak can do. I've watched them tear through fortified positions like they were made of paper. Your people, they're not built for this kind of fighting. Captain Dongjun looked at him with those quiet eyes. Commander, you might be surprised what humans are built for. That night, Tekvar lay in his quarters thinking about the human response. Their calm acceptance of the situation bothered him. Either they were too naive to understand the danger or they knew something he didn't. He decided it was naivety. These people came from a peaceful garden world where the biggest threats were probably weather patterns and crop diseases. They had no experience with real warfare, no understanding of what it meant to face an enemy that could literally tear you apart with bare hands. Tomorrow, they would jump to hyperspace and head for the contested system. Tekvar made a private decision to prepare evacuation protocols for the human forces. When they saw the reality of combat against the Vorthak, they would need a way to retreat quickly. It was the least he could do for such a helpless species. After all, someone had to protect them from their own foolish bravery. The colony world Thessia 9 was burning when the galactic fleet arrived. From orbit, Tekvar could see the massive Vorthak landing ships scattered across the planet's surface like metal cancers. Smoke rose from a dozen cities and the planet's defense grid was completely silent. Battle stations, Admiral Zoranth's voice crackled through the communication system. All forces prepare for immediate assault. Tekvar watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Vorthak had positioned themselves perfectly, using the civilian population centers as shields. Any direct orbital bombardment would kill millions of innocent people. They would have to go down and dig the enemy out building by building. The first wave launched within an hour. Tekvar commanded a squadron of Zelani assault craft, their crystal hulls gleaming as they descended through the atmosphere. Around him, the massive Brutarian dropships fell like meteors, each one carrying 100 of their giant warriors. The landing zones were supposed to be clear. Intelligence had identified several areas where the Vorthak presence was minimal. Instead, they flew straight into a trap. Vorthak super soldiers were waiting for them. Tekvar got his first close look at the enemy as his ship touched down. The Vorthak were even more terrifying in person than in the intelligence reports. Each one stood 10 feet tall, their bodies a mixture of organic tissue and mechanical enhancements. Their arms ended in weapons that were grown rather than built, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. The Brutarian warriors charged first, their battle cries shaking the ground. For a moment, Tekvar felt confident. Nothing could stand against a Brutarian charge. Their natural armor and massive strength had broken every enemy they had ever faced. Then the Vorthak super soldiers moved. They were fast. Impossibly fast. They flowed around the Brutarian attack like water, their integrated weapons firing with perfect accuracy. The proud Brutarian warriors who had never known defeat began to fall. General Thokmar himself, the strongest warrior of his generation, found himself grappling with a Vorthak super soldier. The alien monster was smaller than the Brutarian general, but it moved with mechanical precision. When Thokmar's massive fist connected, the Vorthak's wounds began healing almost immediately. Within minutes, the Brutarian charge had become a Brutarian retreat. The Photari tried next, phasing in and out of solid matter to attack from unexpected angles. But the Vorthak had some kind of energy-dampening field that disrupted their energy forms. The beings of pure light found themselves forced into solid shapes, vulnerable and confused. The Katrani suffered the worst fate of all. Their perfect hive-mind coordination became a weakness when the Vorthak activated psionic jammers. The insect warriors suddenly found themselves cut off from each other, thousands of individual minds trying to function without their collective consciousness. They scattered in panic, their unity shattered. Tekvar's own Zelani forces fared little better. Their crystal bodies, so effective against normal weapons, cracked and shattered under Vorthak energy blasts. Warriors who had fought for decades fell in their first encounter with the super soldiers. Within 3 hours, the entire galactic assault force was in full retreat. Ships fled back to orbit carrying wounded and demoralized troops. The greatest military alliance in the galaxy had been broken by an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. Tekvar sat in his command chair, staring at the casualty reports. Half his warriors were dead or wounded. The Brutarian losses were even worse. The Photari had simply vanished, probably scattered to distant star systems in their energy forms. The Katrani were still trying to re-establish their hive-mind connection. "Commander," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human ship." Tekvar almost laughed. In all the chaos, he had forgotten about the humans completely. Their tiny ship had been assigned to the safest landing zone, far from the main assault areas. He assumed they were calling to request evacuation. "Put them through," he said. Captain Dongjun's face appeared on the screen. Behind him, Thekvar could see the interior of the human ship. It looked calm and organized, not like a vessel in retreat. "Commander," the captain said, "we've established a beachhead on the planet's surface. We're requesting reinforcement and resupply." Thekvar stared at the screen. "Captain, I think you misunderstood the situation. We're in full retreat. The assault has failed." "Not from our perspective," Captain Dongjun replied. "We've secured a landing zone and are prepared to advance on the Vorthak positions. This had to be some kind of mistake. Captain, the Vorthak super soldiers have defeated every force we sent against them. The Brutarians, the Photari, even my own Zelani warriors. How could your people possibly have succeeded where we failed? We approached the problem differently," was all Captain Dongjun said. Against all military doctrine, Thekvar decided to see for himself. He took a small scout ship down to the human landing zone, expecting to find a small group of humans hiding in whatever shelter they could find. Instead, he found something that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans had not just survived contact with the Vorthak, they had thrived. Their small landing zone had been expanded into a fortified position that controlled several square miles of territory. Vorthak positions that had seemed impregnable from orbit were now under human control. Sergeant Yuna met him at the landing pad. The young woman who had looked so fragile on Kronos 7 was now covered in dust and carrying a weapon that hummed with captured Vorthak technology. "Sergeant," Thekvar said, his voice filled with disbelief, "how is this possible?" "We don't fight the same way you do, Commander," she replied. "When the Vorthak super soldiers charged us, we didn't try to match their strength. We made them fight on our terms instead." She led him through the human positions, and Thekvar began to understand. The humans hadn't tried to overpower their enemies. Instead, they had used tactics that turned the Vorthak's advantages against them. The super soldiers were incredibly strong and fast, but they fought like individuals. The humans fought as a team, coordinating their attacks in ways that confused and overwhelmed their enemies. They used the terrain, the buildings, even the weather to their advantage. Kyungho, the medic who had looked so out of place in a military setting, was treating wounded soldiers from multiple species. He had somehow managed to rescue Zelani, Brutarian, and even Photari troops from the battlefield. His aid station was organized with military precision, and wounded aliens who should have been dead were walking around with human-applied bandages. "How did you reach them?" Thekvar asked. The Vorthak positions were completely surrounded. Kyungho looked up from a wounded Brutarian warrior. "We went through the Vorthak positions instead of around them." They weren't expecting that. Suyung, the nervous communications specialist, was coordinating artillery strikes with equipment that appeared to be a mixture of human technology and captured Vorthak systems. She had been working for 18 hours straight but showed no signs of fatigue. "The Vorthak communication frequencies are actually pretty easy to crack," she explained to Thekvar. "Once we figured out their command structure, we could predict their movements." What amazed Thekvar most was that the humans had achieved all this while suffering minimal casualties. They had outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and outfought an enemy that had crushed every other force in the galaxy. As the day ended, Captain Dongjun stood with Thekvar on a hill overlooking the human positions. In the distance, Vorthak forces were pulling back from areas they had held for days. "Captain," Thekvar said slowly, "I owe you an apology. I underestimated your people." "Most species do," Captain Dongjun replied. "They see our size, our apparent fragility, and they assume we're weak. They forget that intelligence and determination can be more powerful than physical strength." Thekvar looked out at the battlefield where human tactics were slowly turning the tide of the war. For the first time since the assault began, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Thekvar had never spent 3 days in continuous combat before. His people, the Zelani, were used to short, intense battles that ended quickly. But the humans had been fighting without rest for 72 hours, and they showed no signs of stopping. He followed Sergeant Yuna through the human positions, trying to understand how they managed to keep going. The young woman who had seemed so fragile during their first meeting was now moving with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. Her uniform was torn and dirty, her face was streaked with dust, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "How do you do it?" Thekvar asked as they crouched behind a damaged wall. "Your people have been fighting for 3 days without proper rest." Yuna checked her weapon and smiled grimly. "Humans are stubborn, Commander. We don't like to quit when people are counting on us. A Vorthak energy blast scorched the air above their heads. Yuna immediately returned fire with a weapon that Thekvar didn't recognize. It appeared to be built from Vorthak technology but modified in ways that made it more effective. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "We built it," she replied, reloading with practiced efficiency. Humans are good at taking things apart and putting them back together in new ways. This was something Thekvar was beginning to understand about humans. They didn't just fight with the weapons they brought. They adapted, modified, and improved everything they could get their hands on. The human positions were full of hybrid technology that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. They moved to the communications center, where Su-Young was coordinating with orbital support. She had been awake for most of the past 3 days, running on what the humans called coffee and determination. Her hands moved constantly across control panels that mixed human, Vorthak, and Zelani technology. "Status report," Yuna requested. "The Brutarians are learning fast," Su-Young replied without looking up. "General Thokmar's forces have adopted the squad tactics we showed them. They're actually pushing forward again." Thekvar was amazed. The proud Brutarian warriors who had never accepted advice from anyone were now following human tactical doctrine. It shouldn't have worked. Brutarians were individuals fighters, not team players, but somehow the humans had found a way to make it effective. "The Photari are still struggling with the energy-dampening fields," Su-Young continued, "but Kyung-ho figured out a way to modify their containment units. They should be back in action within a few hours." This was impossible. Photari technology was beyond the understanding of most species. How could a human medic, someone with no training in energy manipulation, solve a problem that had stumped the galaxy's best scientists? The answer came when they reached the medical station. Kyung-ho was working on a wounded Photari, his hands surrounded by devices that hummed with carefully controlled energy. The being of pure light flickered weakly in a modified containment field. The problem wasn't the technology, Kyung-ho explained to Thekvar while continuing his work. It was the approach. Everyone was trying to fight the dampening field directly. We just needed to work around it instead. He made an adjustment to the containment unit and the Photari's light suddenly blazed brighter, the energy being pulsed with what Thekvar recognized as gratitude, before phasing through the wall to rejoin the battle. "How did you know that would work?" Thekvar asked. Kyung-ho shrugged. "I didn't. But someone needed help, so I had to try something." This attitude was something Thekvar saw throughout the human forces. They didn't wait for orders or permission. When they saw a problem, they found a solution. When someone needed help, they provided it. When the situation changed, they adapted. An explosion shook the building and alarms began blaring. A Vorthak counterattack was incoming, and it was a big one. Through the windows, Thekvar could see super soldiers advancing in formation, their weapons charging for a devastating assault. "All units, prepare for incoming attack." Yuna's voice echoed through the communication system. "Remember, we don't fight them on their terms." Thekvar watched the human response with fascination. Instead of meeting the Vorthak charge head-on, they seemed to melt away from their positions. But they weren't retreating. They were repositioning. The Vorthak super soldiers reached the human lines and found nothing. Empty buildings, abandoned positions, no targets for their overwhelming firepower. For a moment they seemed confused. Then the humans struck from all sides at once. They had used the underground tunnels, the rooftops, even the sewers to get behind the Vorthak advance. The super soldiers found themselves surrounded by enemies who refused to fight fair. Human squads appeared, fired, and disappeared before the Vorthak could respond. But what amazed Thekvar most was what happened when Sergeant Yuna was hit. A Vorthak energy blast caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into a wall. Thekvar expected the human attack to falter, for the squad to fall back to help their wounded leader. Instead, the opposite happened. The humans became more coordinated, more aggressive, more dangerous. Their attacks intensified. Their tactics became more creative. Their determination grew stronger. "Why?" Thekvar asked a human soldier who was providing cover fire. "Why do you fight harder when one of your own is wounded?" The soldier, a young man named Jinwoo, looked at him with confusion. "Because they hurt one of ours," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "That makes us angry. And angry humans are dangerous humans." This was completely backwards from everything Thekvar understood about military psychology. When leaders were wounded, forces became demoralized and less effective. When units took casualties, they retreated and regrouped, but humans seemed to operate on different principles entirely. He watched Kyung-ho risk his life to reach Sergeant Yuna's position. The medic ran through direct fire from 3 Vorthak super soldiers, diving and rolling to avoid energy blasts that would have vaporized him instantly. When he reached Yuna, he immediately began treating her wound while continuing to coordinate defensive fire. "Why?" Tekvar asked when he reached their position. "Why risk yourself for one person?" Kyung-ho looked up from his work, his hands still busy with medical supplies. "Because she's one of ours. Humans don't leave people behind." A Vorthak super soldier rounded the corner, its weapon already charging. Tekvar raised his own gun, but Kyung-ho was faster. The medic grabbed a surgical laser from his kit and somehow turned it into a weapon, burning through the super soldier's armor with precision that surprised even Tekvar. "Nice shot," Yuna said, wincing as Kyung-ho finished bandaging her shoulder. "Thanks," Kyung-ho replied. "Now stop getting shot. I'm running out of bandages." As the battle continued, Tekvar began to see the pattern. Humans didn't fight for territory or glory or strategic advantage. They fought for each other. Every human soldier seemed personally responsible for every other human soldier's safety. When one was threatened, all of them responded. This created a psychological effect that the Vorthak super soldiers couldn't understand. They were designed to overwhelm individual opponents through superior strength and firepower, but they weren't facing individuals. They were facing a group that functioned like a single organism. By the end of the day, the Vorthak counterattack had been completely repelled. The super soldiers retreated to their fortified positions, leaving behind equipment and wounded that the humans immediately turned to their own advantage. Tekvar sat with Captain Dongjun as the sun set over the battlefield. The human commander looked tired but determined, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for the next threat. "Captain," Tekvar said slowly, "I think I'm beginning to understand your people." "Oh?" Dongjun replied. "What have you figured out?" "You don't fight like warriors," Tekvar said. "You fight like family." Captain Dongjun smiled for the first time since Tekvar had met him. "Now you're getting it, Commander. That's exactly what we are." 1 week after the first failed assault, the Galactic forces prepared for their final attack on the Vorthak stronghold. But this time everything was different. Tekvar looked across the staging area and saw something that would have been impossible just days ago. Brutarian warriors were working in small teams instead of charging alone. Photari energy beings coordinated their attacks with perfect timing. Kitrani insect soldiers operated in flexible groups rather than relying entirely on their hive mind. Every species had learned to fight like humans. Captain Dongjun stood at the center of it all, quietly coordinating with alien commanders who had once dismissed his people as weak. The human military advisors were now embedded with every major force, teaching tactics that had turned the tide of the war. "Final briefing in 10 minutes, Soo-young announced over the communication system. Her voice was steady despite the fact that she had been coordinating this massive operation for days with minimal sleep. Tekvar made his way to the command center, where representatives from every species gathered around holographic displays of the Vorthak fortress. The enemy stronghold was massive, built into a mountain range and protected by energy shields that could stop orbital bombardment. Intelligence reports 10,000 Vorthak super soldiers defending the facility, the briefing officer announced. "They've had a week to prepare and they know we're coming." General Thokmar, his massive form now bearing several human-made modifications to his armor, spoke first. "My warriors are ready. We've learned much from our human allies about fighting as teams instead of individuals." Commander Veltar of the Photari flickered into visibility. "Our energy forms have been enhanced with human-designed stabilizers. The dampening fields will not stop us this time." Queen Shikra of the Kitrani clicked her mandibles in agreement. "Our swarms now operate with human flexibility doctrine. We are no longer dependent on central hive coordination." Tekvar looked around the room and felt something he had never experienced before. These weren't just separate species fighting together. They had become a unified force under human tactical philosophy. "The assault begins at dawn," Captain Dongjun said quietly. "Remember, we don't fight their fight. We make them fight ours." As the meeting broke up, Tekvar approached the human captain. "Captain, I've been thinking about something. A week ago, every species here was defeated by the Vorthak. Now we're all confident of victory. What changed?" Dongjun considered the question carefully. We showed them a different way to think about war. Most species fight to defeat their enemies. Humans fight to protect what matters to us. The assault began before sunrise. Tekvar watched from his command ship as thousands of troops descended on the Vorthak stronghold. But this time, instead of separate armies fighting separate battles, he saw something magnificent. The attack unfolded like a symphony conducted by human tactical doctrine. Brutarian teams struck at precisely coordinated points while Photari energy beings phased through defenses to attack from within. Ketrani swarms flowed around obstacles like water, adapting instantly to changing conditions. The Vorthak super soldiers, designed to overwhelm enemies through individual superiority, found themselves facing something they couldn't understand. Every time they concentrated their forces to break one attack, 3 more appeared from unexpected directions. When they tried to use their regeneration abilities to outlast their enemies, human medics appeared to keep the allied forces fighting at full strength. Tekvar's own ship was part of the assault, and he found himself in the thick of the fighting. His crystalline warriors moved with new tactical awareness, coordinating their attacks and supporting each other in ways they had never done before. During the battle, his ship took heavy damage from Vorthak defense batteries. The crystal hull cracked and several of his crew were badly wounded. As Tekvar struggled to maintain control, he felt his own body beginning to fail. A massive energy blast had shattered part of his crystalline structure, and he could feel his strength bleeding away. He expected to be left behind according to Zelani military tradition. Wounded warriors who could no longer fight were honored but abandoned, allowing the healthy troops to continue the mission. It was the logical way to conduct warfare. Instead, he found himself being lifted by someone much smaller than himself. Su Yung, the human communications specialist who had seemed so nervous and fragile during their first meeting, was carrying him toward the medical evacuation area. She was barely half his size and had been coordinating the massive assault for hours without rest, but she had somehow found the strength to rescue him. Su Yung, Tekvar protested weakly. You should save yourself. I'm too heavy. My injuries are too severe. She looked down at him with eyes that had seen too much war in too short a time. Sir, humans don't leave people behind. That's not who we are. As she carried him to safety, Tekvar watched the final phase of the battle unfold around them. The Vorthak stronghold, which had seemed impregnable just hours ago, was falling to forces that had learned to think like humans. The super soldiers were retreating in confusion. They had been designed to fight against enemies who would break under pressure, flee when wounded, or surrender when faced with superior force. Instead, they faced an enemy that became more determined as the battle became more desperate. Human-trained forces didn't retreat when wounded. They fought harder to protect their injured comrades. They didn't break when their lines were pierced. They adapted and struck back from new angles. They didn't surrender when faced with superior individual force. They coordinated to create superior group tactics. The Vorthak commanders, watching their perfect soldiers defeated by tactics they couldn't comprehend, finally did something they had never done in their long history of conquest. They surrendered. Tekvar watched from the medical station as Vorthak super soldiers laid down their weapons and submitted to capture. The most feared military force in the galaxy had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior thinking. How do you feel, Commander? Kyung-ho asked as he finished treating Tekvar's wounds. Amazed, Tekvar replied honestly, and humbled. 3 months later, Tekvar sat in his office on the Zelani homeworld, writing his final report to the Galactic Council. Through his window, he could see human military advisors training Zelani recruits in the new tactical doctrines that had become standard throughout the galaxy. His report was simple and direct. I have observed the species known as humanity in extended combat operations. Initial assessments of human military capability were completely incorrect. Humans are not frail. They are the most effective warriors in the galaxy. Their strength does not come from individual physical capability, but from their refusal to abandon each other and their ability to adapt any situation to their advantage. They do not fight for territory, resources, or dominance. They fight for the person standing next to them, and this makes them essentially undefeatable. Recommendation: immediate establishment of human military academies on all council worlds. The phrase human standard tactics should become the foundation of all council military doctrine. Personal note: I have learned more about warfare from humans in 1 week than I learned in 30 years of Zelani military service. We called them Frail, but they are the strongest people I have ever met. Tekvar set down his stylus and looked at the small plaque on his desk, a gift from Captain Dongjun. It read, "Humans don't leave people behind." He thought about Su Yung carrying him to safety when any logical military doctrine would have left him to die. He thought about Kyung-ho risking his life to save wounded aliens he had never met before. He thought about humans fighting harder when their friends were threatened, instead of becoming demoralized. For the first time in his long military career, Tekvar understood what it really meant to be a warrior. It wasn't about being the strongest or the toughest or the most heavily armed. It was about being willing to fight for something more important than yourself. The humans had taught the galaxy that weakness could be strength, that caring could be a weapon, and that the most dangerous enemy was one who refused to abandon hope. As he prepared to submit his report, Tekvar smiled his crystal smile. The galaxy was a safer place now, protected by the most unlikely warriors imaginable. The humans had changed everything, and they had done it by being exactly who they were,